There's a moment, infinitesimal and silent, when the world hurls its judgment at you. A glance sharp enough to cut, a word soaked in doubt, an accusation aimed not at what you did, but at who you are. And in that breathless pause before you respond, time offers you a cruel bargain. Defend yourself and relinquish your power. It feels almost natural, almost noble to correct the record, to reach out with trembling fingers and fix how you're being seen. But nature is not always wise, and nobility often lacks the cunning to survive. Because when you answer an accusation, you're not clearing your name. You're kneeling to the throne of their perception. You're saying, you hold the lens, and I must look acceptable through it. But in the shadows of true power, there is no lens, only mirrors. And the moment you place your hands in defense, you show the world that you bleed. And bleeding things attract teeth. Machiavelli didn't learn this through books. He saw it in the corridors of whispers, where silence was louder than fury. The man who says, "You've misunderstood me," believes he's gaining clarity, but he's simply handing over control, confirming that someone else's understanding defines his reality. He wants to be seen as good, right? Fair. But those who seek fairness forget that the world isn't a courtroom. It's a theater. And the one who controls the spotlight writes the script. The real power is not in being right. It is in making others question whether they ever had the authority to ask. Those who remain silent in the face of criticism aren't mute. They are architects of doubt. A single, unbothered look, a silence held with poise, fractures the rhythm of the attacker's heart. They expected resistance. They find a void. And into that void pours their own insecurity. Silence, when crafted like a blade, does more than protect. It destabilizes. It turns the loud into the lost, the bold into the desperate. Because the absence of your defense is not emptiness. It is a mirror too polished for comfort. They see their own need, their own craving to be right, and nothing frightens the fragile more than a reflection they cannot argue with. The powerful never explain, not because they lack words, but because they understand words are currency, and they refuse to spend it on the undeserving. Accusations thrown at a silent man echo until they collapse under their own weight. Those who sling mud expect a splash. When there is none, they look around, baffled, suddenly aware of the dirt on their own hands. The moment you answer, you play their game. You enter their arena, but to remain still. That is to remind them the fight is theirs alone. And while they dance around the fire of their ego, you become the smoke they can't touch, the heat they can't extinguish. It is not passivity. It is strategy carved from stone. Even in rooms where reputations are currency, where perception swings like a blade above every neck, the one who doesn't flinch draws all eyes. When a jab is thrown, the crowd doesn't remember the insult. They remember your reaction, or lack of it. And in that stillness, your image grows. Not softer but sharper, not warmer but heavier. The kind of weight that makes others hesitate before speaking your name. Machiavelli would whisper that fear is more binding than affection, and unpredictability more powerful than reputation. Because the man who cannot be read cannot be trapped. When accused, he doesn't retaliate. He inverts. When called manipulative, he smiles and says, "If that's how you see it." And with those 7 words, the entire room tilts. The accuser is now the one defending. They've become the spectacle. You see, people expect reaction. They need it to validate their narrative. But when none comes, when the accused remains poised and unshaken, the script falters. The audience starts to question the motive of the attacker. Was it jealousy? Insecurity? Projection? And you? You remain untouched, above the noise, surrounded by your own myth. Even more ruthless is the quiet disappearance. Not a block, not a snub, just an absence that echoes. Let them speak into the void, into silence that reflects nothing back. They begin to spiral, filling the space with louder accusations, desperate to provoke. But the more they shout, the more they show their need. And the more you remain still, the more their voice becomes background hum to your presence. True Machiavellian mastery is this: turning their emotions into your elevation. They accuse you of arrogance? How fragile their ego must be to mistake confidence for contempt. They say you're manipulative, perhaps because they are finally outside your influence. They call you fake? Maybe because they can no longer predict your path. Every word they throw becomes a confession, not about you, but about their discomfort with your stillness. And in the eyes of others, that discomfort becomes the real spectacle. You become the mystery, the one they don't understand but feel drawn to. Power grows in the unknown, and your silence is a shadow that stretches longer than any scream. People forget. Defense is reaction. Reaction is proof that something landed. But when nothing lands, when you show no bruise, no break, not even a shift in breath, you become not just respected but feared. Not because of what you might say, but because of what you don't. They start imagining what you could say, what you might do, and that uncertainty does more damage than any rebuttal. You don't need to prove innocence. Innocence is the belief of the naive. You need to prove strength. And strength isn't loud. It's the choice not to speak when speaking would be too easy. It's restraint that feels like danger. And once people sense that your silence is intentional, their perception of you shifts. They stop judging. They start calculating. Even in relationships, when emotions flare, the average person rushes to validate, to mend, to clarify. But if you stand calmly amid emotional storms and respond not with justification, but with, "That's not how I see it," you take back the tempo. You turn their chaos into background noise and establish that you are the anchor, not the ship. The longer you resist the urge to explain, the more you ascend from the plane of others' approval. You begin to occupy a different tier, not louder, just heavier, not reactive, just inevitable. And the final form of this transformation is presence. Aura. Not crafted with words, but with intentional stillness, studied posture, and measured gaze. Power, real power, isn't won in arguments. It's built in silence. When people start wondering what you're thinking, what you're planning, why you didn't respond, that's when you've already won. Because now every silence becomes strategy. Every pause, a decision. And the battlefield is no longer words, but perception itself. Let them accuse. Let them fumble. Let them exhaust themselves trying to provoke a ghost. You don't need to fight. You've become the war,